All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first ever fundraising event run by the NumPK project, where we aim to not only bring more awareness towards the digital literacy of the less privileged, but also try to raise funds in order to help the others. Today, we'll have a panel discussion with 5 esteemed speakers regarding whether the poor are left behind in the digital age. But before we begin, I would like to invite the founder of this project to say a few words. Divya?
Hello, my name is Divya, and as Iman said, this is our debut event. This charity, the NumPK project, has been founded barely a month ago by myself with the aim of getting computers to our local orphanages here in Malaysia. And it's a great honor to have you all here with us on this momentous occasion. So I see quite a few 10B students here, or 10B alumni, of which I too am one. And we were all fortunate to have an upbringing, an education in which we were surrounded by technology. From a young age, we could feel our way around the digital world. But this question has always plagued me. What about the children who do not have these opportunities? Since we were little, we've had work with Microsoft Word and PowerPoint, and this has prepared us for college life and projects. And are the poor left behind if they do not have these similar abilities? Let me talk about the Sai Pandian Children's Home. It is located in Setia Indah, just a stone's throw away from 10B, the former school of many of our viewers here. They have 23 children at the moment, aged 1 up to 21. They are registered with the government, but being a small establishment, they do not get any grants. And fortunately, there are plenty of generous people in the neighborhood who sponsor meals, sponsor bills, and sponsor clothing for the children. However, they do not have this technological aspect in their education. So our first goal with the NumPK project is to raise money to buy some desktops for these children, as well as get internet for them. Without further ado, we have Iman, our moderator, and esteemed debater himself. And I shall pass the mic to him to introduce our guest speakers.
Thank you, Divya, for the wonderful intro presentation and speech. I wouldn't call myself an esteemed debater myself, but before we begin, let's introduce our 5 speakers for today. First, we have Leo. We also have Shiv, Zoe, Dinesh, and finally, Youngsun. Right. As we all know, the topic for today's panel discussion is talk about whether the poor are left behind in the digital age. To begin, let's have some opening statements from each of the panel speakers. Leo?
So to begin with, I think that the poor are definitely left behind in the digital age, something which has been exacerbated because of the events of the past year. So during the period of MCO, we see that lots of things have shifted to be online, which is a big disadvantage to those who are impoverished. In particular, many job postings and vacancies are advertised online on sites like Job Street Malaysia, which I understand is a very little effort comparative to the relative reach for the employer. But what it does is it takes away from these postings in communal message boards or in 7-Elevens. And sometimes those who are in poverty are the ones who need this opportunity or who rely on part-time employment the most. So they are certainly unfairly disenfranchised, let's say, with regard to their status in the digital world. So yes, I do agree that the poor are being left behind in the digital age.
Thank you, Leo. Shiv, what about you? What do you think?
Well, I don't think anyone would disagree that the poor are indeed being left behind in the digital age, but I think what's more fundamental is in what respect are they being left behind? So what's the most important consequence of the poor being left behind in the digital age? And for me, that's exacerbating income inequality. So it seems intuitive, and it has been substantiated by studies so Mahin Shajid in 1999, and most recently, Harold Shafril in 2010 proved that there was a positive correlation, especially in Malaysia, between levels of education and digital literacy. And especially in a country like Malaysia, where education is very high, ranked based on wealth. And so the more wealthy you are, generally, the better education you have. You can see the problem already sort of developing, where the better educated sort of sections of society have more access to digital products, and by extension are more digitally literate, and the less educated sections of society aren't. And especially in a growing world where everything is becoming more digitized. So the emergence of the gig economy, so freelancers, decentralization of the labor force, and especially because of the COVID shock, employers are increasingly shifting towards employing more digital workspaces rather than physical workspaces. If the economy continues down this trend, and if the trend in education and wealth doesn't change, which it unlikely is to change in the next couple of decades, then you can see why income inequality in Malaysia is going to spiral out of control very, very quickly if digital literacy isn't sort of brought up to equilibrium.
Right. Absolutely. Zoe, what are your thoughts on this statement?
Well, working from home, attending online classes, and even to hosting online Zoom birthday parties, they all represent the new norm in Malaysia. And for me, it is the final push in the paradigm shift towards using digital tools rather than physical ones, especially when it comes to socializing, where online platforms such as WhatsApp and Signal have become very imperative during this digital era. And based on the ICT use and access by individuals and household survey conducted by the Department of Statistics Malaysia 2019, computer usage in rural areas stands at only a mere 54%, while that in urban areas stands at 74%, ultimately showing that Malaysians in rural regions are left behind and are significantly hampered in their pursuit to improve their quality of life. And like how Shivi said, it's about the trend in finances. And right now, the issue regarding this digital gap is an issue about government policies. It is an issue about financial instability and the lack of initiative from private sectors and the general public. And now I may not have all the answers, but I am looking forward to exploring more about this topic with my fellow panelists to hopefully find some footing towards the right direction.
Absolutely. We cannot wait for the further part of this discussion. Dinesh, what do you have to say on this statement?
I think echoing the tangent of what other speakers have said. I don't think anybody's going to deny that the poor are left behind. But rather, interestingly, if you examine the reasons and causes behind it, you find that and given that, regrettably, society is flawed in the sense that people don't have equal opportunity towards opportunities such as like digital products and stuff like that give them the upper edge in like climbing the social ladder. However, the benefit of society being imperfect is that it leaves a lot of room for conversations to be had, i.e. important actors within capitalism, be it the private sector or the government. I think income inequality and the poor being left behind is not necessarily an indictment of capitalism, but rather an opportunity to examine what more these actors could do while fulfilling their various individual incentives in order to better spread the benefits of living in a capitalist economy.
That's definitely an interesting take on this topic. Yang Tseng, everybody else has talked something about the economy, maybe something about the disparity between East and West Malaysia.
Yep. Thank you, Iman. First of all, of course, I echo all other panelists' opinion in terms of that poor is left behind in this COVID age. It's already a problem pre-COVID-19, just because of this pandemic, the problem is even more apparent. So in terms of the East and West Malaysia, the biggest difference is that how the public sector sees as a successful digital implementation. For example, right now we have around 90% and above in terms of our digital penetration, our internet, broadband coverage. But the issue here that is faced by East Malaysia is that we don't look at it from the geographic perspective. We just look at a population perspective. So for example, most of the population is at West Malaysia. The proximity is higher. The density is higher in just one small geographical area, especially in Kuala Lumpur and other West Coast states in West Malaysia. So for example, if you successfully penetrated digitally in just West Coast Malaysia, the population stats is going to spike up. But if you go to East Malaysia, where the rural are more dispersed, the population is lower, but the geographical coverage is higher. And that's why you see that the Eastern Malaysian people, they don't feel that impact when they see numbers where there's 90% plus of mobile penetration. Because right now, what the public sector is seeing right now is on population basis instead of geographical coverage basis. And that's why recently we saw news, for example, there's a Sabahan girl where in order to finish her exam, she climbed up to the tree just to do that. That is one of the issue faced between East and West Malaysia. Right now, our problem is not on the population coverage problem. The issue is more on the geographical coverage problem. So that's my take at the start for now. Back to you.
Thank you, Yang Tseng. I mean, generally, I think everybody's in agreement that the poor are definitely left behind in this digital age. However, let's get into the real discussion. Who is actually responsible for this gap or disparity in the digital literacy among the less privileged and the more privileged? Should it be the poor people themselves to go close these gaps, given the fact that technology nowadays is more accessible in terms of pricing and internet access is even more accessible nowadays? Or should it be the responsibility of the public sector or the government to fund more initiatives to help to bridge this gap? Or should it be the responsibility of the private sector? Let's get something to do the poor people first. Should they be responsible? Shiv, what do you think?
Well, absolutely not. It's just, for me personally, it's outrageous to think that poor people themselves should be responsible for conditions that are, especially digital conditions that are completely out of their control. They're not they don't control where broadbands, where there is internet penetration. They don't control their accessibility to computer products or digital literacy. Most of it is government mandated, and I would say, yes, the government is responsible. But again, I'm also very, very realistic. And in order to solve the solution, I don't think we should be placing much emphasis on the government to be able to really get anywhere with the issue anytime soon. So what I'd say is the government's main role is to provide signals and incentives, because the private sector is much, much more efficient at doing things. But again, private sector is only motivated by profit. So there are incentives, for instance, like echoing what Yang Tseng said, Sabah only has around 52.8% internet penetration, but areas like KL have 115%. And that's not due to a fault in TM, but that's rather due to simply because of population demand. It's the cardinal rule of the private sector. And so in order to incentivize the private sector to bridge out into these rural areas, the government needs to provide, say, tax credits or schemes that help develop the local community, which are beneficial to the private sector, because the government right now is way too inefficient and isn't really even prioritizing helping the poor gain sort of digital literacy in any significant way. I know there have been issues, but there have been initiatives by Syed Siddiq and other members of providing digital products. But again, that's not internet penetration, which to me is the most important thing, because only with internet penetration and with sufficient access to internet can you actually substantially gain computer literacy.
All right, so you said about internet penetration is also being a major factor. What about the less privilege within KL, within these areas which has a lot of high internet penetration, and they still have no access to the internet or have no proper equipment? So should this then be a supplementary initiative by the government to provide them more devices, or should the poor people, should less privileged then go buy them themselves? Because like as previously stated, that these devices are not as expensive as way before. Zoe, perhaps a statement to that?
I'll have to pass it on to another panelist for now to gather my thoughts, if you don't mind.
That's fair.
I could respond to that, seeing as it's
okay, sure, go ahead.
Somehow,
go ahead.
Because it's like, I mean, for sure that's an important issue, and I think initiatives by the government there are well-founded. So initiatives by Syed Siddiq in that aspect, and other government ministers doing things for their constituency would really help. But again, that's, for me personally, that's not the main problem, because it's really addressing the inequality both geographically and among socioeconomic classes. So I don't want to dismiss the problem outright and say that it's a marginal issue, but in terms of bringing the entire country up to a digitally literate level, the priority emphasis should be on equalizing internet penetration across the country, across different regions.
Okay, Leo, perhaps.
I disagree slightly. Yeah, I disagree slightly because if you look at the budget for Malaysia 2021, the Malaysian budget for 2021, you will see that the subsidies the government is providing for people in terms of internet access and digital equality is 180 ringgit total in a year. Like, for instance, let's just be very clear. That is not sufficient for like a family to purchase enough data or purchase enough equipment for them to access internet. So I largely agree with Shivi's point, saying that internet penetration and internet availability, widespread availability, is a big problem, a big factor in this. But I also think that sometimes we tend to overlook just how much indeed those at the bottom of the economic income and social ladder is. And like, for instance, if you are living in KL and you have to feed 4 mouths and you have 180 ringgit and suddenly MCO hits and you're like, oh no, now schooling is all online. How are you going to secure enough devices, enough data, enough service to cover your bases? I think that it's unreasonable. And I think that a better initiative and better understanding of the people's needs is required from the government.
Okay, yeah, but what would you suggest that the government does? It does any differently right now? Because it's on the one hand, it's busy responding to COVID-19. And on the other hand, it simply doesn't have the expertise and know-how to respond sufficiently to that. I mean, this is like a decade in the making. Vision 2020, which was largely about improving computer literacy, was outlined in 1991, and we barely hit those targets. So instead of blaming the government and trying, I mean, yes, the government is to blame, but instead of getting the government to do something, shouldn't we look for other solutions that are more practical and likely to work?
I think, yes, to some extent, you have to look realistically, but if we don't hold the government responsible for their failings, and if
well,
we don't hold...
I'm not saying we shouldn't hold the government responsible. I'm saying the government is responsible, but they should tackle it in a different way. As I said, incentives to the private sector, because they're more efficient at practically everything. The government simply can't do direct action, so they can't use government expenditure for their own programs because it's never worked in the past. There's simply no historical evidence.
Okay, maybe Zoe and Youngza might want to interject in this debate.
Yes, I am personally more towards private sector, towards the government, as clearly seen by the unstable political climate, as they're tackling much more irrelevant issues right now instead of handling their citizens in terms of healthcare with the COVID-19 vaccines and the question about helping their citizens adapt to a more digitalized city right now. I wouldn't really hold them too much responsibility as of now, because we've been burned once, we've been burned twice, and many times before. And not everybody is ready to leave their hands and their future up to the government, even though we have no choice. Speaking for the people, it sounds much more like a viable and a much more valid and much more safe way if we urge private corporations, the private sector, to take a stance and help their consumers who improve this cycle of like economy and consumerism.
Well, from my side, I would think more from the East Malaysian perspective. When we hear about the word poor, there's two perspectives. On the West Malaysian side of poor, we usually assume it as urban poor, where maybe some demographics, they are poor, but the environment surrounded them are middle class. right? So the problem in West Malaysia is that the potential for social mobility is still there. But when we go to East Malaysia, for the rural demographic, there is simply no environment that is around middle class where social mobility is very difficult for them to climb. And then I'd like to bring up the capitalism argument brought up by Dinesh just now. So how do we help the poor? That's a pretty huge implication on each approaches. On one side, we said we want to help the poor, but by saying we want to help the poor, we're assuming ourselves as, are we a welfare state like the United Kingdom or other Western European countries? But based on the most of the Asian states, like Malaysia, Singapore, our governance style is that we provide the foundation, and then you are not entitled to anything. The public sector will provide the necessary goods, and then it is up to the people to get it themselves. But the issue here for the so-called poor, especially in East Malaysia, is that the goods simply do not reach them for them to simply start any sort of activity that can commence the social mobility activity. For example, right now, all of us here, we are discussing issues like this, and the foundation during this COVID era is because all of us have laptop, all of us has internet connection, all of us have basic streaming software like Zoom. So these are the stuff that us middle class or upper classes, we don't really realize it, but for them, it is a very huge privilege because all these stuff, we have the chance that when we want to use it, there's a chance for us to climb the social ladder. It's difficult, yes, but the ladder is there. For East Malaysia, the ladder is simply not there. So for this to be present in front of them, for my side, I don't think we can only lean on the private sector. It should be public driven with private sector as a supplement. Let the public sector to do these activities that private sector will not go into, but it's still necessary for the country to move forward. And then when the framework is done, all those typical market niche, all those demographic niche where there might be certain opportunities for profit to be made, then you will let the private sector go in. That's my take when we are talking about helping the poor or not. Back to you.
Okay, generally speaking, everybody has been discussing this problem in general. Some may point fingers towards the public sector, being not as efficient enough, or maybe some think that the private sector is more efficient at having an impact. So we discussed the issue. What about solutions? Let's say theoretically, in a theoretically perfect Malaysian government where everything's effective, everything's efficient, right? What kind of solutions do you think that the government should take in order to address this issue, Leo?
I think one of the most important things is, for instance, in a lot of more developed countries, you can access the internet, access computer IT services via public libraries. And I think that's severely overlooked within Malaysia. For instance, the nearest public library to my house, like the full-scale public library, is Perpustakaan Rajatun Uda, which is approximately 22 kilometers from my house. And I live in Shah Alam, which is a very, very urbanized area. There is a lack of provision in terms of publicly available ICT, IT services for printing, for applying to government aid, for applying for new passports, ID. That is one aspect. And I think on top of that, there needs to be a renewal of the ICT assets that are present within the education system. We can't keep letting schools run with 7-year-old, 10-year-old desktops. It's just not viable. It's not productive, and it doesn't teach the students the right IT skills because they're dealing with software issues half of the time.
Okay, Shiv, maybe?
So in a theoretical world where the government's very, very efficient, you're presuming efficiency not in terms of the private sector efficiency, but efficiency in responding to social needs. And if Malaysia was, as it were, perfectly efficient, the Malaysian government, then essentially they would recognize the problem of this digital divide, as it's called, mainly between the rich and the poor, because that's the biggest area of issue in the digital divide. budget priorities would be targeted more to that, especially at the national level, not so much the state. But yeah, that's what an efficient government is, because you really, everything else is you're presuming a perfect bureaucracy. You're presuming that, as Leo said, like there's more accessibility to everything because it's a perfectly run machine. But it's not so much because there's efficiency. It's not so much how they get it done, that they're able to respond to this gap, this growing income gap, this growing digital divide, and incorporate it into their budgets, their plans for how to best solve the solution. So really, what I'm trying to say is that if I'm trying to sort of reject the question, which is unfair, but if you have a perfect,
what if it's not perfect? What do you think? What could be a viable solution that the government could do?
Well, I mean, if it's not perfect, I'm going to go back to what I said, which is the sort of incentivize private corporations to help. So development zones and tax credits, those have all been proven to work so effectively, especially in small rural communities, and raising not just wealth of that community, but intergenerational wealth, which is the most important thing, because educational standards improved, and if there's a sort of catching up effect where the entire country in a decade's time sort of returns to equilibrium. Again, that returning to equilibrium is the sort of perfect world that we don't live in, but it certainly goes a long way to alleviate the problem, more so than, again, what the government is doing now. But yes, to go back, in a perfect government, there shouldn't be this problem in the first place, because they would know how to address the problem.
Unfortunately, we don't live in a perfect world.
I know.
I mean, shift that kind of solution is more towards long-term solution, right? And then there's investing in infrastructure, the long run will, in the end, will achieve that some sort of equilibrium. What about like short-term solutions, and what can the government do now in order to address that? As perhaps I think Janssen brought up, where the Syed Sadiq had their own initiative, right? More with he bought laptops for his own constituency. Do you think this could be a viable solution that we can implement nationwide, that the government can do to provide for every state that they can do such things?
Thanks. But just to make sure, am I audible? Because just now the screen showed me that my internet is unstable. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. In terms of Syed Sadiq's initiative on giving laptops, of course, it's a good initiative, definitely. And I think in terms from the public sector as a whole, to be honest, in this day and age, especially because of COVID-19, if it's pre-COVID-19, I may not agree to it, but I think because of this pandemic, I believe that public provision of basic digital tools like laptops, these kind of stuff, at this time, it should be done. Because before COVID-19, if we don't have certain things, although more difficult, but we can still use our physical activity to get that done. But right now, COVID-19, where we are constrained by movement control order, and we are constrained by interstate restrictions, these kind of stuff, it's more like it's necessary for everyone to have a basic laptop already. Smartphone may not be necessary, may not be a must, but laptop at this time and age, it's a must. So I think if we are talking about giving solution at present now, I believe that the public provision, which the government promised, if I recall correctly, it should be held accountable, that the government should take more initiatives in providing public goods directly. I don't think this is spoon feeding the people because of this COVID context. It is not spoon feeding in this context, and I think the government should continue such initiative. To be honest, I won't even use continue, because I don't think it's something that has really begun compared to members of parliament, that they really do it with action. But from the federal side, not really much in nationwide scale. But I emphasize again, because of this pandemic, in this exceptional circumstance, public provision of certain goods is not considered as spoon feeding policy. Back to you.
Okay. Zoe, you kind of take a bit more stance on the private sector. given the fact that there could be a theoretical collaboration within the government to give incentives towards the private sector to help more in the in bridging this gap, what could the private sector do more in order to help this problem?
Personally, there have been sorry, could you just repeat the question?
So like certain companies, they do CSR, or they collaborate with a certain NGO, of a local NGO, to try to help the local communities. What could companies do more? What could the private sector do more to help this issue? Trying to bridge this gap. What kind of solutions do you think could be effective in tackling this issue?
As far as to my knowledge, I guess we all see institutions who give out particular scholarships to students who are in need of full scholarships as they come from not so well-off backgrounds. The Sinchu Daily, I believe, has a scholarship. But something I want to talk about is the James Dyson Award, which is a program set up by the James Dyson company itself. All your hair dryers, your vacuum cleaners. This particular company has a program where it encourages youth, no matter what your background is, no matter what community you're from, it encourages youth to just innovate. And any idea that you have, any idea that could change the world, just promote it, think of it, present it. And by the way, there's no fee involved in participating in it, by the way. And when you participate, and let's just say if you win, your idea could go global. You're gonna work with Dyson and you could go global and it could change your life forever. These programs aimed not to discriminate against only if you're from a particular community, only if you're from a particular income background. That doesn't matter. As long as you're a person and you're alive and breathing and you have ideas that you want to promote to the world, go for it. The private corporations can sponsor these youths to go out and change the world, no matter their circumstances.
I think one caveat to that is that you have to be able to be aware and to be able to access these opportunities in the first place, which I guess is part of the problem, because in a lot of impoverished contexts, a lot of these scholarships are available online and the information is given out online. So without access to the internet in the first place, I don't think it's viable for companies to be promoting it online to impoverished communities, because they might not even be able to. This might not even reach them in the first place.
And that is why we are here to talk about it.
Right. I mean, I guess to go back on Zoe's point about there's certain scholarships that are being given, or certain private organizations, they raise funds for certain for the less privileged, right? There could be I read this paper online where there's the fact that because of Malaysia's multicultural background, right? There's also the sense of division in terms of providing funds. For example, the Malay community will have a lot more funding from, let's say, the religious organizations, as the Malay community might be more inclined to donate to the mosques or religious organizations, which would rather fund these donations towards the Malay community. Or Chinese corporations, they fund private schooling, such as their schools, their award scholarships. However, there's also kind of a lack of the Indian community, where it's a lack of funding provided by them, given the fact that there's maybe not a lot of large corporations or large donors that are able to do so. Dinesh, maybe something about that?
Race motivated policies or even charities necessarily, right? At the point in which race forms a part of the consideration, you've already failed in terms of trying to address poverty and trying to relieve poverty, because more often than not, income levels vary greatly across all demographics. Like, no one race is particularly poor, no one race is particularly rich. So I think in regards to solely relying on charity, I think it's quite intuitive that the Indian community is left behind, simply because by having less population, that correlates into less Indian-centric charity organizations and less Indian-centric government policies. I think insofar as we're looking towards poverty relief, until it gets to a point where all poverty initiatives are solely focused on income level, we will always have race disparity.
Right. What about Shiv? Any words on that, maybe?
Yeah, I agree with what Dinesh said, but also we're getting into a tricky area here where it's sort of
Definitely.
racial tribalism, and again, going back to the fact that we don't live in a perfect society. We live in an imperfect world where resources are unevenly distributed. But as for what I'd say to that is, yeah, some people are given more advantages than others, but again, on a macro level, again, echoing what Dinesh said, we should focus more on solutions that directly target income levels rather than race. And these tend to be solutions that are not, that go away from charities.
Right.
And again, if we could look at both aspects of this, so domestic corporations tend to be more racially biased than MNCs. The government can be more racially biased. So in incorporating a solution, I guess what I'm trying to say is we don't really fully, we can't fully come up with a solution that is all income targeting, because we have to acknowledge that these differences do exist, and that this is, as sad as it is to say, this is a part of Malaysian society, and to some extent it is inevitable in any multicultural society. But to sort of speak on that and what we can do about that, I feel would deviate away from what we're trying to talk about here. So I'll stop myself and defer back to you.
Right. I mean, generally speaking, like the government initiatives are definitely more inclusive in general. Perhaps that's more towards the private sector. Perhaps as like a kind of round off on this thing, do you think that maybe the poor could be too dependent on aid, you know, at some point where they rely on this to become more, you know, like they don't try to get themselves out of the situation, rather they rely on charitable donations for them to, you know, get themselves out of the situation. Leo, perhaps.
Yeah, I wanted to speak on this because there's some very interesting numbers being thrown around online. So if you look at the BPR scheme, which is the government's aid scheme for B40 communities, the largest amount you can receive as a family of four earning under 2,900 ringgit a month is 750 ringgit. Now, if you look at the average living cost throughout Malaysia, not even within KL, it's on average 6,797 ringgit a month. It is nowhere near to sufficient to an extent where people can reliably rely on the aid to survive. So personally, I don't think people will rely on this aid because it's just not sufficient for them to carry on their lives. Like, it's, yes, in a society whereby you provide sufficient aid, maybe it might become an issue, but then that becomes a cultural issue, right? You can't just say that, okay, we think that you guys will be reliant on this. You don't have any proof for that in the time being, and as of right now, it's just insufficient for people to live on. So no, I don't think people will become reliant on aid from the government.
Right. Young Sung, maybe something to add to that?
Yeah, apologies. Can you repeat the question again? Because just now my internet connection, I can only hear Leo's speech, but not yours.
Right. So talking about more about whether the poor could be dependent on aid. You know, like if we give too much, would there be a point where the poor people would say that, okay, the government will just give us money anyways, so why do we have to, you know, why do we have to buy this laptops by ourselves if the government's going to buy it for us? So they think they'll be dependent on such aid in the future.
I think in Malaysian society, we don't really see much in terms of a spoon feeding process compared with Western Europe, like United Kingdom, France, Germany, where it's a full-fledged welfare state where even middle class are able to get a lot of benefits that they are entitled to if they are unemployed, etc. In Malaysia, we don't have this entrenched habit where if we lose something, we deserve something being given by the one at the top. So in terms of the aid, I think, to be honest, in Malaysia or basically ASEAN states, we actually balance it quite well in the sense where we still give aid, like what Leo mentioned, but we are still able to manage that. They are not completely entitled to it because it's more like a status quo in our Malaysian society already, where not everyone and not no sorry, everyone will not be entitled to certain things. It's you have to climb it yourself. But if it's too severe, especially this COVID-19, which the government has did do, where they provide certain subsidies, they provide certain what's it called, stimulant packages, they do play the role of giving stuff out without any transaction in place. I think from pre-COVID and compared with the present status quo, I still think we balance well in terms of giving aid and not to do too much where the so-called poor or rural demographic assume that this is their right to get these things without any more proactive action demanded from them anymore. That's my take on this.
Cool. Maybe Zoe as a last take on this.
It's kind of a thought I would like to leave my other panelists is that, okay, I understand that current aid that we're giving now to the poor people is nowhere near enough. That's a fact. But let's just say in an idealistic situation where the aid we are giving is sufficient, we are giving the proper resources to them, will they become over-dependent on that? I think evidence is seen in the incident with Tom's Shoes, where a company who just manufactures shoes decided to give out free shoes to everybody. And that completely destroyed, and this was in Latin America, and it's completely destroyed the shoe industry. Like all smaller businesses collapsed because this one company decided to give out free shoes to everybody. So, because I understand that right now it's not the idyllic situation, I'm kind of thinking it more of like, if we were right now giving sufficient aid, will they become over-dependent? And in my head, in that idealistic world where they will become over-dependent. We are then raising a generation where if I'm poor, I don't have to worry about anything. I can rely on the government who has me backed up all the way. And that is where my thought goes into chaos, utter social chaos. Because that is what we should be thinking about. I understand we can't give any proper solutions that, yes, of course, raise the aid, raise the funds, raise the finance, raise equipment, but we can't do that. How can we?
Okay. Just maybe to wrap this whole entire discussion up, let's just ask one final question. All these children in the homes, these homes, these orphanages or these organizations, they rely on charitable donations in order to buy necessities such as food, clothing, pay the bills. So why should we buy computers instead? When we have other stuff they need to buy, why do we need to buy computers right now? Dinesh.
Yeah, I think this is a classic case of teach a man to fish, he eats for a day. Give a man a fish, he eats for a day. Teach a man to fish and he eats for a lifetime situation, right? That intuitively, if you as a member of society and you want to make a donation, intuitively you would want that money to go into something tangible. You would want them to buy rice with it, buy food with it. However, the issue is that largely is a sticking point as well. People don't necessarily want to fund initiatives like buying laptops as opposed to buying rice, because as a donor you don't get that instant gratification when you see somebody get the immediate tangible product of rice. But I think it's definitely required, it's definitely something essential, because that laptop or that digital product offers more opportunities than that tangible food product or whatever ever could.
Leo?
I would say that I think one point to bring up is that the UN has been pushing since 2005 for universal access to the internet to be recognized as a universal human right, and it's very, very commendable that they're trying for that. But one thing I would like to bring up is that there's lots of food banks and lots of corporations are generating charities, especially during the MCO period. And I think that is a great way for us to help people, and if you can help charity and you can help those who are less fortunate than you should do it in any way that you can. I think one thing is that we should also keep in mind that the digital gap between the poorest within our society and the middle class is huge. There is a huge gap between availability, accessibility, and things like that. And I think, in today's world, computer literacy and computer skills can be the difference between you being able to survive and hold a job and between you not being able to do that, because companies are increasingly looking for people with computer literacy skills. It's now listed as a requirement instead of as a bonus. So what this does is it gives the tools to those who are in this situation to pull themselves out of the hole. Now, it may not happen within one generation. It may take multiple generations, but to start the process is very important.
All right.
I'd like to add on the point, if that's okay, based on what Dinesh said on the tangible benefits of a laptop. From the middle class perspective, the intangible benefits that the laptop provides us is that it is a channel for us to express any creativity we got, any innovation that we got, or any simple live things, just like what Leo said just now on even the scholarship you need, and you need a laptop or basically something that can give you access to the digital world to fill up the form. These are the intangible benefits seen from the middle class perspective. Now, from the rural demographic, we have come to the point where a laptop is not just a channel for that anymore. It is completely one of the tools that they need to survive in this day and age. Previously, we are still able to use our physical capabilities to solve the issue, even though it's not the conventional approach anymore. But if we do that pre-COVID-19, it's still possible to get a lot of basic things done. But right now, all the basic things that we do in life, everything must come from our laptop because all of us are stuck at home. And I don't foresee post-COVID-19, everything will go back to normal without any things that we are seeing now completely gone. Once that equilibrium is changed, it won't go back to normal 100%. So giving a laptop, the state provision of a laptop is no longer a spoon-feeding policy for the so-called poor to enjoy the intangible benefits that the middle class enjoys. Right now, in this day and age, present stage and post-COVID-19 stage, just the state provision of laptops is already a number one key for them to survive, regardless of the area that they live in, regardless of the income status that they live in, because of this COVID-19. So yeah, I'll get back to you.
Zoe, some closing statements on this question.
I guess it's just the current perception that it's still in the traditional way that, oh, all we need is food, water, shelter, that's it. I can understand from the perspective of a few people who are unwilling to donate for laptops because they still have that old mindset that who needs technology, who still needs it, because I still have my paper and pen, there's still postal service, there's still mediums where I can still get my point across, which do not require technology. But that in that sense, what I believe that talks like these, raising awareness of how much technology is important, that is the first step forward into convincing people that yes, we need to donate pieces of equipment to the underprivileged who even survive. Because I mean, look at this, we're even having this talk online now. People without devices can't even get on. So it's just a matter of convincing, it's a matter of changing mindsets and just raising basic awareness that, especially during this MCO, there is no way to talk to your teacher, your friends, anybody at all outside of your family circle without the use of either a phone or a laptop. So it's just a matter of taking that first step of saying, hey, would you like to know more about how important your laptop is and how maybe you don't see it as important because you already have it. You can use it whenever you want, and it's within arm's reach. Maybe that's where you neglect that importance, that how you cherish it. I mean, see how many of us could change your phone in like a heartbeat. if we wanted to, if we broke it. There is no sense of significance in it. But we fail to see from like the rural side of the area, like they really have nothing. They really have nothing at that point. So I guess just to sum up my point, take that first step and raise awareness that, hey, buy a computer for them. It's important. Yeah.
Right. Shiv, finally for you, what's the last statement? Why do we need to buy laptops for them?
I think everyone else pretty much covered it, but to summarize, I'd say like food, perishables, day-to-day needs, they're an investment in the present, but laptops, digital products and devices, they're an investment in the future. And it's all about, that ideal future that we all want to achieve. And yeah, I mean, everyone else covered it beautifully, so I don't really have much to say.
Absolutely. And now we've opened the floor for any questions that you guys might want to ask the panel of speakers. So if you guys would like to ask a question, please turn on your microphones and ask away.
Raise your hands first and wait to be called upon.
Yes, follow the order given by Divya.
Point of order.
Ooh, Carmen, yeah.
Hi, everyone. So thank you very much for all your points. So this is just a question in general for the panelists. I think we've all acknowledged that digital access is absolutely as essential as, for example, water and shelter. So I'll draw a parallel to another necessity, food. We have food deserts, for example, in rural areas and akin to Yongzhen's point in the East, and yet Malaysia's advancement in tackling hunger has been one of the best in ASEAN. So in comparison, what makes the question of digital access so different to these other necessities in terms of government efficiency?
I guess there's a very clear focus from the government right now, and I don't think that focus is necessarily in the right place, especially in terms of digital access. Like for instance, when they brought up the case of the girl in Sabah who had to climb a tree to deal with her internet connection, the Deputy Communications and Multimedia Minister addressed the Dewan Rakyat with a lie, saying that she wasn't doing an exam at the time. Like, I think there's a lack of gravity, and there's a lack of a proper assessment of the situation from the government, and I don't think they are directing their efforts correctly. They're not necessarily looking into it properly to solve the issue. I think that's a key point. At the analysis stat, they've already failed to sufficiently address it.
Yep, I'd like to add up. I'd like to speak on this as well. In terms of our country's efficiency in tackling hunger, compared to if we compare this tackling hunger and digital access, what I would say is that the issues such as tackling hunger or providing basic amenities such as water, street lights, these kind of stuff are considered crucial to the government. These are public goods that they have to do it. It is their mandate to do it. What COVID-19 brings to us is that digital access has moved from a measure that we have to encourage people to use it to a stage where it is now also almost parallel with this hunger issue, where it is also a crucial good already. Before this, the digital access is more like we encourage people to use it. There's a lot of benefits around it. So it's more like you need to think of ways to nudge people to do certain things. But because of COVID stage, digital access has elevated itself to a public good already. And when it's a public good, government will treat it as this is the stuff that we should do. Because based on the current status quo, to get digital access, like I said before, is no longer an issue of choice. It's already a necessity, right? So we have a lot of issue where a lot of people say, why is this implementation not being efficiently enough? Or some people say, oh, because of the lack of political will. Now, what is the cause of the lack of political will? Most of the time is because these are not the stuff that they feel that they must do. If they did not do, the legitimacy of the current government will drop significantly. So imagine a governing government, not just from the Democratic Party perspective, but from the whole state machinery, from parliament to its bureaucracy. If this complete state machinery did not provide access for us to water, to basic roads, these kind of stuff, it will definitely lead to significant upheaval from every aspect of life, whether it's social, whether it's economic, whether it's political. Right now, at this COVID-19 stage, digital access is at that stage as well already. The failure to provide digital tools like this is also going to hurt the legitimacy of the state machinery as a whole, not just from the parliamentary party perspective anymore. That's my opinion. And that's why right now, I agree with you. Our government's approach to hunger, to water, the basic stuff, of course, we have certain flaws. But when we see from the overall, or we can see from our own life, it's being done well. Digital access, soon to be, it's going to be at that stage right now. The middle class, the upper class, the rural class will also treat it as this is something that people should have already, because of this COVID-19 that nudges everything to develop, or I would say elevate this digital access from a private good to a public good level already. It is a necessity for government to provide such stuff. That's why, to compile everything that I said, pre-COVID, yes, we might say it's a spoon-feeding policy because we try to encourage people to absorb the benefits of digital access. Now and post-COVID-19, digital access is something that we deserve to have it, because it's more of a survival tool for us already, because everyone is forced to stay at home. So that's my answer for you, Carmen.
Right. So are there any other questions? Maybe someone else would like to ask a final question. Okay, I guess seeing as there none, you guys could, I've definitely asked some questions on the Instagram page, on the Facebook page. The links will be given to you guys through email, and also Divya will share with you guys about these social media pages. So if you guys have any questions about any of the project as a whole, please feel free to ask, to send the questions through the social media links. I guess that's a final statement to the whole discussion. As we can see, that there's a lot of initiatives being given. There's a lot of responsibilities are shared equally amongst the government, the private sector, and also the people in general as a whole. But I don't think we can wait for someone else to take initiative. This is what we're trying to achieve, or what we're trying to achieve here at the NamBK project. We're just trying to encourage the people as a whole to take the initiative, to make that first step in trying to help the local community and trying to make a change immediately and have a direct impact, whether it be through charitable donations or it could even through volunteering. And this is what we're trying to do, to encourage people to raise awareness, and and eventually also raise funds to help the local less privileged, and make an impact for the future. And thank you for participating. As the last thing, I'll pass it to Divya to have final words.
Yes, thank you so much, Iman, for agreeing to moderate this event. And thank you so much to our panelists who have done extensive research. Many of them are law students studying like corporate law, and this is pretty new to them, but they have yet agreed to participate and share their opinions on this issue. So yes, and of course, thank you to you viewers too, who have used up your Saturday evening to watch students debate about the government and who should be funding technological initiatives. So yes, as hotly discussed earlier, in the ideal world, yes, the government would step up and they would fund such initiatives, but we cannot sit around and wait for this to happen. So the best way in which we, the citizens, can help is to donate to NGOs such as our current organization. A few ways in which you can do this is firstly through our brand new website. Big thanks to Arun, who is here in our call. He has designed this website for us, and I'll share the screen so you all can get a glimpse of it. It's a very new website. So at the moment, you can see a little trailer video. At the moment, you can only donate a standard amount of 20 ringgit, but by next weekend, the website with all its full functionalities should be available. Alternatively, if you'd like to donate more or less, I suppose, than 20 ringgit, we shall email banking details as well as all our social media profiles to you, viewers. With that being said, I would like to give a final thanks and bid farewell to all of you panelists, moderator, and viewers, and wish you a good evening.